Hello, everyone, and welcome to another horse talk. Today, we asked Representative Josh Boschee to come back and talk. I just want to point out, I do have everybody muted just out of respect for our host. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. I want to just reiterate this because it is very different. I know I came from Chicago, so politics in Chicago are very different than they are in North Dakota. And our North Dakota legislators are part-time politicians, I think. Is that correct, Josh? Is that how you refer to it? They're in session once every 2 years. So we literally got very lucky this year that when the park announced their plans to eliminate all the horses in December, our legislators were getting ready to start session. And I think that we made it look really easy, Josh. I think everybody that was involved in this, and I think because we didn't say all along all the different things that were happening along the way. And I know I talked to you several times, Senator Rummel, Senator Elkin, and it was, yes, we're going to do a resolution. No, we're not going to do a resolution. We don't see the point. Oh yeah, Josh is going to do the resolution. No, Senator Elkin's going to do the resolution. And so there was a lot of back and forth. And, but really we only had until January 26th to get something drafted and put into the session to get it heard this legislative session. So it did pass unanimously, so that was good. I also think that there is some confusion, and I know I hear this all the time in our store too, where people think that because the state and the our federal delegates are on board, that we've saved the horses, but they're still in their process. They're doing a NEPA process, and we should be hearing sometime this summer. They should be releasing their draft environmental assessment, and then there'll be a 30-day comment period. So we have nothing else to think but that environmental assessment is going to support their plans to reduce the number of horses or eliminate them. But so I'll leave it to you, Josh, and then we'll see if people have questions. If you want to talk about, people keep asking me, like, what did you do to get your state involved? So I guess what got your attention and how did we get here?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris, and thanks for everyone that's tuning in or watching at another time. It's good to reconnect with you all. And we had one of these conversations, I think May or April, I don't remember. It was towards the end of session, if not after session. But even just the progress that's been made in those few short months. I mean, think about it, Chris. It's been what, 7 months of work that we've been working together. I mean, you guys have been carrying a lot of the sweat, blood, and tears. I helped with the inside information, but it's night and day, I think, from where we started to where we are now.
Yeah, the horses have gotten a lot of support, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so, what got me involved and connected with Chris and the other advocates is, first of all, there was a number of folks who just started emailing our legislators. And as Chris shared, in North Dakota, we are what we call citizen legislators. A lot of your states consider themselves citizen legislators, but we consider ourselves extreme citizen legislators because we meet every other year and really only for 4 months. And so right after an election, we prepare in December to come into session the following January through April. And that's when we have an 80-day window that the Constitution allows us to take action, to enact policy, pass resolutions, to establish our budget for the next 2 years. And right at that time, as we were organizing or getting together in Bismarck, I started receiving emails, and I don't know if it was because I was part of leadership or if they were going to all legislators, but it kind of felt like a good cadence of a couple emails each day or within a short period of time, quite a few emails. And I've been serving in the legislature for 10 years. And one of my first sessions, I served on the Agriculture Committee. And at that time, there was work being done to make the Dakota horse, I believe, the official horse of North Dakota. And I just remember getting these emails about the horses who I have never had any interaction with the horses at the park prior to this. And I just remember the thousands of emails we received that session from people all over the world who are in love with the Dakota horses and we're advocating for us to become, or for the Dakota horse to be the official horse of North Dakota and receive some sort of, I think, whether it was just recognition or protection. But because of the volume of people who reached out, we literally fast tracked a bunch of things with the resolution that year because it was just inundating everyone's times. Everyone's mailboxes were filling up with people from North Dakota, from around the country, from around the world. And it really was, for many of my colleagues, getting obnoxious. It just was like, there's a lot going on, and this is an important conversation, but these emails, we have to stop these emails. And the one way we knew we could stop it was to advance the resolution as quickly as possible. So we had the hearings, and it passed, and Frank Kuntz and many others in North Dakota who have continued to be strong advocates for the Dakota horses, we were able to have that successfully passed. So when I started receiving these emails, I just kind of had flashbacks of, oh boy, is this going to be another one of those scenarios? The session was already starting off a little tense. There was a lot of new leaders. I was the only returning leader of the 4 caucuses. We're in a strong financial position with the budget, but there was different kind of political factions that were organizing and creating some tension throughout session. So my fear was that these advocates who were advocating to protect the horses in the park may be stumbling into some orneriness. Some of us who just were like, no one wants to do with these horses. What are these horses? So I had reached out and just said, hey, let's get on the phone to Chris, and let's talk about what you're trying to do, and how we can funnel this into an organized process so that all these advocates around the state and around the country can put their work towards something, and it's not just kind of shotgun to cross and just random legislators are receiving these emails. How do we make sure we get the right people on board? How do we make sure it's in a process that works with our legislative process? And then giving people an opportunity to advocate through the hearing process. And so that's what got our work going. And we were able to funnel that. And what was nice about that was, as Chris had indicated, there was a lot of back and forth because there was a number of legislators, both in the House and the Senate, and within both political parties, who had interest in making sure that these horses were protected. And as advocates and people who were supportive of the horses were reaching out, telling their family stories or their personal stories about the relationship they have with the horses, many of my legislative colleagues have those same feelings, whether they live in that district or nearby. Senator Rummel, who often photographs the park and the wildlife in the park, and the horses are part of that, or Senator Beckedahl, who's from the Williston area, who, his interest was not only in making sure we preserve tourism in that part of the state, but also the impact that the Longhorns have on the park and the people who come to see the Longhorns. And so, in between our other meetings, and, we become very busy in those 80 days, we all just would catch each other, and kind of within a short period of time, as Chris indicated, I said, I'll have something ready to go, but I'd rather us work with some legislators from out west who represent this district. So we were able to get some of them on board. It wasn't a hard sell. They have interest. They had connection to the park and to the horses. And so we just funneled it into the resolution process. And for those that are watching, what that means is in North Dakota, and commonly, in a lot of different political bodies, a resolution is not an act of policy. It is actually just a statement. And in this case, it was a statement of support that the state of North Dakota sees the value of the horses in not only the natural wildlife that exists within the park, but also the impact to tourism and a strong quality of life in North Dakota. We knew at the same time that our Governor Burgum has been a very strong advocate for the park, specifically in building the National Museum and Library there, which we had supported as the legislature in previous bienniums. So, we reached out to the governor's office, and right away on board. They were on board, and at the same time, Chris and other advocates were working with folks like the Dickinson Chamber of Commerce, the Medora Tourism group, and chamber, and kind of those boots on the ground, the people who live in the community. And so we just, we were able to funnel all those different entities on top of the people who are individually advocating for the horses to be a part of this resolution process, which still had a hearing. So the Ag and Natural Resources Committee, the Agriculture Committee of both the Senate and the House had hearings. It gave advocates an opportunity to participate and talk about why they supported the horses and keeping them as part of our park. And then also allowed the opportunity for the governor and others to make statements of how can North Dakota be a partner in maintaining the herd. We have resources within our university system that the governor continued to bring up, which was great, whether that's the North Dakota State University equine program, the Dakota State, or excuse me, Dickinson State University equine program, looking at our Parks and Rec program. Is it a matter of do we need to volunteer and provide four-wheelers or ATVs to get to the horses for volunteers? Is it something that Game and Fish can be a partner in? So really coming to the table about how can we be solution focused. And then at the same time, the governor was able to convene a meeting as we were going through the legislative process. Again, because this was the National Park Service, we as the legislature have no authority over the federal government or federal agencies. But in a government-to-government relationship, the governor's office is really the direct line of communication to federal agencies. And so Governor Burgum was able to convene a meeting that included Senator Hoeven, who is a former governor of North Dakota and serves on a key budget committee that the National Park Service, if I understand correctly, that budget comes under his purview, and he's one of the members that has some jurisdiction over that. And so once Senator Hoeven came on board, we were able to convene some calls with the National Park Service, and they took the federal advocacy route and started saying, okay, how do we work within the federal government process? And at that time, then Senator Kramer, who our second senator, came on board. And I'm pleased with the work that the advocates have done and with Chris and others' leadership that as of a month or 6 weeks ago, Congressman Armstrong, who was our single at-large congressman, advocated in support of keeping the horses in the park. And so it's kind of been a rolling or a domino, or however we look at a snowball or dominoes falling, each week, I think, because of the advocacy that folks have done and being able to funnel that into a process, allowed small wins along the way that have got us now to we're essentially in unison. The state of North Dakota is in support of these horses, both at the advocacy level of our state government, but also some local governments. There have been plenty of articles done by an amazing reporter, Patrick Springer, for Forum Communications. He's really known for digging deep into things and being a good investigative reporter. And so he has been, talking to the Park Service, talking to the governor's office, talking to advocates, looking at not only the science behind how some of these decisions are made, but also the history and the anthropology of the area and the impacts. And so, I think there's been no less than 5 significant articles that he's written that have then been published statewide, kind of educating the public on the various conversations that are happening, whether it's the Park Service's current position and the process that they're going through, or the position of the advocates, the state government now, and so forth. And so, I was unfortunately not able to attend the rally that happened 10 days ago. But I think because of the work and this groundswell of support and getting Senator Hoeven and our congressional delegation on board, all of a sudden Chris got about a month's notice saying that the National Park Director was coming to North Dakota and was open to having a conversation with some of the advocates. And so he came here into the park, saw the horses, I assume personally, but also had conversations with many of you.
Yeah, we did meet with him. He didn't come to the rally. I would guess he saw the horse, but I'm not sure. He was really busy when he was here. I know that the day that we seen him, he had a lot of meetings going on. But so for other people then who aren't in North Dakota, because now wild horses out west are like under attack everywhere. And I know there's a couple organizations that are wondering, so how do they get their state's attention? Is it a matter of doing mass emailing? Does it matter if people are contacting from out of state or out of the country? And I think that the tourism angle, I think, always is a good one to go through, because then you're talking about money coming into the state. So
Yeah, I think first of all, if there's able to be a lead organization or a lead entity in your state, or someone who has experience in working with your state legislature, we have 50 state legislatures. Each of us are organized differently. The advantage we have in North Dakota is that every bill and resolution that gets introduced gets a hearing. That's not the case in actually most states. Many states, if you don't have the blessing of the chair of a key committee or the majority or minority leader or a budget section writer, your bill may never see the light of day. It'll exist in draft form, but won't get a hearing. And so I think it's important for you to start with looking at your individual state. So if it's New Mexico or Arizona, Wyoming, Idaho, some of these states where we know that the horses are under consideration. And I know it's universal because it's a policy for the Park Service, but we know that there's greater populations of these horses in some of our, especially our Mountain West states, in the Southwest. Figure out what is the process. And so some organizations to think about, they don't have to be partners on the books, but is there an animal advocacy group in the state that is used to lobbying the legislature? So it may be an organization like a state humane society or the Stockmen's Association, who actually are two entities that rarely will ever work together because
Right.
of their political means are different. But they both, visit with both organizations, not necessarily to bring them on board right away, but to learn about how should I advocate for policy in my state, because they're going to know who is the key legislator or legislators in your state that you should have a sit down with and visit with. Because again, with each of your states, it may be that you want to enact policy because there's a budget surplus and we can set aside $500,000 to create a training program at our vet college in our state. Or is it designating the horses as the official horse of the state or a protected wildlife within whatever parameters the state may have. But I think advocacy organizations like them would be good partners to check with. You can go through and I would look at the different committees to see, I assume, again, Mountain West states and the Southwest area, we're going to have agriculture or committees that relate to agriculture. Look at that list of members and maybe focus your attention on those 5 to 15 people to start the conversation with. Again, I didn't serve on any of those committees. I just have my experience from 2013 and 15, whenever it was with the Dakota horses. And so that sprung me into action. And as Chris has learned, my background is in organizing, and I like to help people build political power, be a part of the political process, and understand how it works so that they can, advocate for the things that are important to them in their lives. First and foremost, I would say, what are the other advocacy groups in the state that might have more experience that you can just pick their brain about and ask them about how things happen in your state, and then really look at those key committees. And it might be a natural resources committee. You might not have a standalone agriculture committee. It might be someone that has a Parks and Rec portfolio in their committee, or tourism, those different angles that you're looking at supporting. In part of your advocacy for the horses.
One of the things too I want to say, because I know that part of the hesitation that some of the senators had when we were going back and forth in the beginning was that what is this resolution going to do? Like you said, this is a state and it's a federal. And what I did find out when we were in Washington, D.C. is that this became a very powerful piece now in our advocacy toolkit. And I was just, as you mentioned, a couple weeks ago in Medora, and the city of Medora now formulated their own resolution asking the park to keep the horses. So those are things that are just helping us advocate really essentially. So I think that that's important to note, because when we had the signing of the resolution, I know I talked to a couple of the senators and said, this mattered. It mattered more than we even thought as it was going on. So that was great. Did it matter? Would it have mattered to you that you were getting local advocates, or if it was a national organization or an organization that maybe like out west, I guess, like there's some groups that don't necessarily live in that state, but they advocate for wild horses through the West. Does it mean more coming from citizens from the state?
Absolutely. And for me, some of the emails I got or messages were from personal people I knew personally. Dr. Birgit Prus from Fargo was someone that had reached out. Another individual who I had just met in the previous weeks, he had reached out as he relocated back to the state. So that helped kind of just trigger more to me, because we get emails all the time from national groups advocating a position, and sometimes they like to use our states as tools to advance, to make progress, right? If you can get 2 or 3 states on board to do something, then you can go to the next state and say, we already have 3 states. Now we have 5 now. So the fact that what I was receiving initially was advocacy from people who are consider my neighbors or live in North Dakota and know our state was very powerful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I do know that there's a unique situation, like the prior mountain wild horses are another group that are coming under attack. And one of the advocates there contacted me because she was like, what can we do? What did you do? How did you do what you did? But her problem is that that park is partially in Montana and partially in Wyoming.
Mm.
So when they go to the Wyoming legislators, they say, yeah, that's a Montana problem. And when they go to Montana, they say it's a Wyoming problem. So how do you combat that, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's that's certainly, and that's probably even, I don't know these legislators that they visited with, but I could assume if it's a tactic that either I have used or others have used of, I might be busy and I don't have time for this, so have someone else figure it out first.
Right.
And so it might be some of that, but you know, part of the angle, we're in North Dakota. And what I know about Montana and Wyoming is they're very similar to us in the fact that we're very independent people. We don't like to be told what to do.
Right.
And so one of the frames, I was prepared to use, but I didn't have to use because of the large support we had already, was the angle around federal overreach and talk about, even though these are horses in a federal under a federal agency's jurisdiction or part of their land, these are our horses, and we don't like the government telling us what to do. And so using that as an angle, and so maybe in especially some of those Mountain West states, is that part of the angle of, this is the federal government trying to tell us and manage this more than when it's something we could take on as well. The other opportunities I think is there are regional organizations. Our Governor Burgum is just, I think, coming off as he either currently is or is recently the chair of the Western Governors Association.
Okay.
So, that might be an opportunity to, if you want to do an introduction to staff to those governors. But there's also organizations like the Council of State Governments, which is essentially our professional development, one of our professional development organizations as legislators. So there's a Western division of that. And so North Dakota, we're part of the Midwest division. So I know Montana and everyone else would be part of the Western division, but that might be an opportunity to organize too, is if they have a conference coming up in your community or nearby, once you can go to their website, again, it's the Council of State Governments, CSG, we call it, but look at the Western division and see what do they got going on. Are there articles written about outdoor heritage or wildlife preservation or things like that, and see are there key legislators there that might have already done stuff in the last few years that you could partner with.
Okay. I think that what's also unique here is that we're talking about horses in a national park that are fenced in, and that's where part of the problems that they face on the Western range is that they are dealing with ranching and ranching dollars and that debate between ranching and wildlife on federal lands and the use of public lands. So that we had the Stockman's Association in North Dakota advocating with us just blew everybody away because that never happens.
Right.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or any suggestions, how you combat that.
Yeah, no, and that's a good distinction, because you're right. Our and I think one of the concerns our stockmen had is knowing that the National Park Service is a conservation-based organization that is getting rid of the horses part of bringing back some other type of animal that we may not want to be neighbors with.
Right.
As part of a federal overreach again, related to the preservation or the bringing back of certain wildlife. And that's where I think some buy-in came from. So that's the other opportunity, is maybe the folks that are in opposition that you'd like to have allies are seeing it for one reason, but there might be two or three other reasons of why we should be partners in this.
Right.
Because if they're successful in removing the herd, and that's the point, is to bring back another animal that may be invasive, it may be natural 200 years ago, but becomes invasive to their operations today. You might find, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? It's
Right.
building those political alliances and partnerships that way.
And then a question I have for you, and I'm not sure if you know this, like on a federal level, um, I was poking and prodding around on some committee websites, and it looked similar to what we did here in North Dakota. And I'm guessing politically it would mirror, like our state laws would mirror federal laws in some capacity, as in, so there's different committees that do different, ag, whatever, they have different things. And I did see where there were like room to testify for different bills and stuff and legislations that were coming through. Those times have passed, but do you know if that, I'm gonna guess it works similar to the way that things did here, where you can submit your testimony online, and then when those congressional hearings happen, how do you get an audience there? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's that's where some of the political process plays out. I've had the honor of being able to testify in front of Congress, in front of the Senate, but that was because Senator Heitkamp served on a committee that was having a conversation about the friction between administrative rules at the federal and state level. And I served on a committee here in North Dakota that had to do with some of that. So three of us state legislators, me from North Dakota, I believe another from Wyoming, and I forget where the other gentleman was from, just talked about our process, right? We were invited by the committee to share a perspective, or our experiences. And so I think the value of building a relationship with your senator or member of Congress helps with that, because especially if they are on that committee, they can help, and their party is in the majority, because that committee is who dictates who speaks,
Right.
generally. That's, I think, an opportunity then to get on the agenda specifically and be a panelist. And again, in North Dakota, our director of water resources, she has been invited, and one of our attorneys from the Attorney General's office, they've spoken about Western water resources. They were just there a few months ago. Senator Kramer has had a couple of North Dakotans come speak around key things. And so, again, at least for us in North Dakota, and I assume like a Wyoming and a Montana and Idaho, those of us with lower population states, we probably have a closer relationship, or have an opportunity to have more of a relationship with our members of Congress, versus, our friends in Arizona or California who, you're one of millions of people. And so how do you break through some of that noise, or build those relationships through those as larger population state? But as far as building an audience, I think it's just making them aware. We do hear that, from, at least I hear from our delegation out of North Dakota, is that, they are counting touch points. So even if it's a canned email or people making phone calls to their office, they're tracking the bill number or the issue, and how many are calling on yes and how many are calling on no, or in between, as a way for, I think, especially the member of Congress to understand, is this an issue that I really should dig deeper into on top of all the issues that they're managing at once?
Okay, that helps. And then,
Yeah.
even from a state level, so, and I think I know this answer, but if you can talk about it maybe a little bit more. And I know that we got the state's attention, and then from getting the state's attention, it helped get the federal delegates' attention. I think that that's another reason. I think that where we're doing the same old, it seems like all the time with wild horse advocacy in the West, is where we're all, everyone's just saying stop wild horse roundups, and they're contacting Congress and asking the same things. And I think that what people are seeing, if I'm right, is what we did here is just kind of like we're it's unprecedented. That's the new word that I hear all the time. Like the Stockman's Association advocating with us, unprecedented. The state legislators coming on board and advocating with us, unprecedented. The state of North Dakota legislators unanimously agreeing on something, right? I mean, that doesn't happen in politics anywhere anymore. Unprecedented. The governor making the offers that he made to help, unprecedented. So, is it, I think that where maybe it's working better for us is that we started here, right? I went to Congress and talked to them, but I started here and then build that support. And I think that that's something that maybe needs to happen piece by piece throughout the Western states, herd by herd, instead of making a blanket every wild horse everywhere. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
if,
I think so. I think, again, because of the entirety of the issues that especially our members of Congress are facing, how do you localize it? How do you make it about their backyard and when they go home? And you do that by building support locally. And I think, again, the snowball or the domino that we were able to do here in North Dakota paid off. And I think another key point is for all of our advocacy groups, regardless of what we're advocating for or against, is politics are polarizing right now. There's a lot of divisiveness. People are exhausted. So, I think our tenor was quickly, and I don't think it was intentional at all, it just happened. And, I give credit to our governor for that, was solution focused, right? It wasn't just don't do this. It was,
Right.
we will be a partner. And these are the things we can do right now off the top of our heads to support the work of the Park Service, to support tourism, to support these horses. And so I'd encourage you to think about that too, is it's not just necessarily being in opposition to a federal agency or to a policy, but how can we help build a coalition of partnership? And because especially the process, right? The federal registry and the open comment periods and things like that, they're there so that we are protected in our ability to communicate with our federal government and the agencies that are enacting policies. But they can be caught up in really being friction or abrasive. And so I think thinking differently about how you can do that, because again, these superintendents, the Park Service, they're used to opposition, right? Especially them being a conservation entity themselves, but with conservationists who oppose them and other industries and whatnot. So when you can come to the table and say, hey, we understand what you're trying to do and you have limited resources, so let's work together to find a solution that works for our community and for our backyard. I think that's what I think I appreciate. Again, when I sat down at the meeting convened by the governor that Senator Hoeven was a part of, he was on the phone. The director of the National Park Service was there. The superintendent was there. Us legislative leaders were there. And boom, the governor just starts offering ideas, right? How can we partner? What are your problems? What are your pain points? What can North Dakota do to support the Park Service and support the horses?
And then do you think that, because I do know that in some of the Western states too, and I know, for example, I think one of our wild horse advocates is going to be doing a debate with one of the federal senators in another state over comments that he made about that aren't true, which I think is great. And hopefully this is going to really bring some attention and things like that. But any other suggestions that you have for being loud like that? And really, I mean, so what happened there was, this advocate came on and said, hey, he said this and he said that, and I'm throwing the gauntlet down. Let's debate, let's talk about it and bring everything you've got, because I'm bringing everything I have. And they answered and said, yeah, we'll do it. But we all called his office and emailed him and said, hey, we want you to debate Scott Beckstead. Hey, debate Scott. So how much like raising awareness like that, and what are other ways that we can get loud? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And especially, I think it's great that the member of Congress, it sounds like a senator, is willing to have the public conversation, right?
Right.
An advocate was holding them accountable to what they said. And so now there's going to be a more public conversation that people can participate in or observe or follow up on after it happens. And so, I think getting loud is important. There's a lot of things and a lot of priorities people have. But it's also figuring out what's your message. Certainly for some people, just protecting the horses is a message that resonates for them. For others, it might be the federal government's coming in and telling us what to do,
Right.
and we need to figure that out. For others, it's about making sure that the federal lands are accessible to all people, and that the policies are reflecting that. So, and there might be multiple messages depending on your audience and how you're getting loud about that. But, again, that's about building that coalition. And especially, I think, when it's able to be different voices. Again, the work that the Chris and our advocates did in the state was not only did, folks like the Stockmen's Association become a part of the coalition, the local business advocates and tourism advocates, but we were able to have some real good conversations with tribal leaders, who then got engaged and said, hey, we're willing to be a partner. There's a very significant, robust tribal reservation near, I don't even know, I don't think they go into the park, but they're close to the park. And so they have a relationship with the wildlife around there. And so became a good partner in that, especially since Park Service falls under Interior.
Right.
And our tribes have a good relationship with the current Secretary of the Interior. And so, again, I think it's thinking beyond the circle. It's really easy for us to get caught up in our circle, right? This happens to me when I'm in the legislature. I'm in the Capitol. Those are the only people I'm talking to. How do I make sure I'm connecting with people back home or hearing different opinions and perspectives on things? And so I think for you to map that as an advocate or an organization, to stop and be like, all right, who's at the table? Who's not at the table? Who do we want at the table, and how do we get them there? So we build, not only we get louder, but we get louder in different ways, in talking to different people.
Right. And then how much do you think, and I'm sure I know the answer, but just like to hear you say it. How much did you pay attention to letters to the editor and things like that were happening within our state?
Yeah, I appreciated them. But I'm a person who, I read the opinion section every day, so I'm seeking out that information. I don't know if all my colleagues, actually, I don't think all my colleagues do. Many do, but so that's also the tough part, right? We all are motivated as policymakers differently, and so mapping that out when you get that list of a key committee that you want to start advocating for in your state. You can do an activity with folks that we call mapping. So you got those 15 members of those committees. You're able to see their legislative profiles. They have a family. What do they do for a living? What's their experience? You can start mapping some. Where are they in the state? Oh, there's 3 of them that border the park we're trying to have a conversation about. Those might be some good allies right away. Then start talking and realize that one of them might be a cousin of somebody who works in the park or has a business in the park. And so now you can build that relationship and use that. And some people would call that manipulative. I don't. I mean, you're looking at what is your way to have a conversation and make this a personal experience for policymakers. Again, especially when we have so many things on our plate and so many things we're trying to accomplish. But now all of a sudden, if my cousin who owns a business in Medora reaches out and says, hey, Josh, these horses are really important to our work and what we're doing. And I know how much you love coming to my fudge shop. I hear all these stories a little bit. And what was powerful to me, and again, as somebody who consumes information, likes to hear from people, universally, the theme for me was the multi-generational story. The story about, I've been seeing the horses since I was a kid, and it was something I experienced with my dad or my grandma or my aunt, on our annual trip or every 5 years. And I'm sharing that with my kids or grandkids now. And I want to make sure the horses, so it was just nice to hear that it was a family experience, right? It was, and certainly tourism plays into that, and people from in the state and outside of the state. But what really just, I think, hooked me was people telling the story about this is a part of our family experience, and these horses mean a lot to us.
And then I think that something that is common too, no matter where it is, because we do know people go see wild horses everywhere. Tourism has to be a big factor in this. And I think that that's a big angle to play. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that, or anything, any key words or anything to use when I just
Yeah,
think everybody cares about money in their state. I think that that's like the bottom line, no matter what you have to say.
yeah, yeah. And and one of the silver linings, I'll call it, that came out of COVID, as horrible as that experience was for many of us, was people got outside. In a state like North Dakota, where we had a good Parks and Rec program, we're a lot of our tourism is based around hunting and fishing. And so now it's more focused on destinations, because all of a sudden we had a groundswell of people who were looking for places to go. And many people had stories about how they tried to get into the Montana parks they'd always gone to, but everyone else was going to the Montana parks. So they checked out North Dakota parks. We as North Dakotans are used to going to Minnesota to their lakes. We were hearing about Minnesotans coming up and camping in our campsites and checking out our lakes. And so I think many states have seen that boon of outdoor activity and recreation that's tied to tourism. And we're now investing significantly in our state around, as a state that's very seasonal, many of our campsites are good for 6 to 7 to 8 months. But once it gets cold, the outhouses don't work. There's not infrastructure for heating. But now we're having that conversation of saying, hey, there's an entire population of people who come here in the winter and stay in a yurt. How do we make sure that it's a safe experience and something people want to do? Fixing our outhouses, working with our Department of Transportation to make sure that roads are able to be clean. That's again a partnership that the state of North Dakota did with the park. Was the park wasn't clearing part of the roads in there because they didn't have the resources financially to maintain the road in the winter. So the governor said, hey, we got a plow truck that goes by there every day or whenever there's snow. So can we have an MOU, a memorandum of understanding that the state of North Dakota will clear that lane so that we can have people when they come to visit, they have the opportunity to drive along that road.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we're part of the problem. And I know that we had this problem too in North Dakota. Like you can't measure that. We can't. And I know I talked to Sarah Adi Coleman, and I know that really were trying to do this, but it's not that we could say tourism brings in X amount of dollars for the horses specifically. We just know that people come here for the horses. And we know from communication that people have that. But so are there, since it's not a measurable thing, like we can't go to the BLM and say, hey, the McCullough Peaks horses bring in X amount of dollars. How do you navigate that, like with the politicians in that area, to get them to pay attention and wake up to the situation?
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. It not being measurable, it might be challenging, but that might be an opportunity to partner with a local university who has, whether it's a tourism program or an equine program or a research program that would be willing to have students and staff that could help measure that. You start finding what data exists and what doesn't, and then you can start finding ways to collect that data. I mean, I think even I don't know how much this data is used for, our state tourism, but I know that there's a way that they would be able to work with folks like our cell phone companies to say on every day how many pings were coming from that, that tower. And you're going to be able to see the number of people that are at least in the park or near the park, right? Of course, the Park Service has their counts. People are going to be able to, they'll be able to do economic impact to show the number of businesses that were doing well or not, and how that impacted the region. And so it might not be tied to the horses, but the horses are an important partner to the musical, and the musical is an important partner to the library that we're investing in, and all that plays into the Maha Day Trail. And so yeah, we can't measure that someone who came camping for a week and walked the trail didn't also now see the horses and are going to come back next year to try to intentionally see the horses while they camp, and they may not have come back the next year. So I think, part of that is visiting with, for those of you in other states, whether it's a regional economic development association, because again, we're in pretty rural states with rural areas, so it might not be a specific city or county, but a multi-county economic development group who might know of a researcher at a nearby campus that's very familiar with the area that could add this or help you figure some of this out. It might be something to think about with your national partners or foundations that support the work of advocacy for the horses. Would they be willing to help invest in research around this so that, again, if we're looking at a specific park or a specific band of horses, that they would help support a graduate assistant for a year at that university to conduct this research and help you have the data that you need. And so those are, I think, the ways that you don't have to, as the advocate or the advocacy organization, to have all the answers. It's who can be our partners that have those expertise to help us with that.
And then how much I know for me, our local Chamber of Commerce here in Dickinson has been great, and has been a great resource, and like not only ideas, but they do things. And again, we do things differently here in North Dakota, but like we had the coffee with the legislators here in Dickinson, where when I first went and talked to Carter Fong, the president of our Dickinson chamber, he was like, you should come to the coffee with the legislators. And at first I thought, I don't even know what this is going to do for me, but it actually was very neat because all our state legislators were there every week. So
Yeah.
even if once they got done with their spiel, we had time to talk one-on-one, ask questions and then also talk afterwards. So do you have any thoughts on that, on just partnering with Chamber of Commerce's either within that community or, and something that we haven't done is gone to like the North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, like the state Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure if are those other things outside of North Dakota, do you think that that's worthwhile partnerships to make?
I think so. Again, it's who's at the table and who's not, and evaluating that. So if there's other people who might be able to speak to different legislators differently, or an entity like a Chamber of Commerce usually is going to have the ear of a committee chair, or at least the leaders of the caucuses within the legislature. Um, but you know, I forgot to tell this story, so I'll tell it now. When I was first elected in 2012, getting ready for my 2013 session, um, a family in the district that I was elected in just emailed me and said, "Hey, we live up on 27th Avenue North or wherever it was they live. We'd like to meet with you. We just want to know who our legislator is and share a little bit about us." So I was open to that. So we met at a coffee shop in downtown Fargo, and we met for about 45 minutes. They told me about them and their family. And within that, they shared some of the issues that are important to them. And that they would like to be a resource to me when those issues come up in the legislature. We don't have staff as legislators in North Dakota. I answer all my emails, I answer all the phones, I have to do all the research with some support from folks in the Capitol. But that was really impactful to me. And that's something I've told other groups when I teach advocacy is, just go meet your legislator first. We put on our pants the same way you all do. We actually are accountable to you. And while in certain states and legislatures, there might be different levels of status or prestige that comes with it. What I love about being a citizen legislator is I spend more time at home than I do in Bismarck. And I think that's the case for many of your legislators or their staff. And so just introducing yourself, it doesn't even have to be about talking about horses. It's just, hey, I'm a citizen, want to tell you about my family and things that are important to me in my business or my work or what I do recreationally. So that way, when you do reach out about issues that are important to you, there's that relationship that's been started. And so, again, what's unique about North Dakota is, I represent 16,500 people. For those of you in larger population states, your state senator may represent 1 million people and your representative may represent 250,000, but they still have staff or other people that you'd have the opportunity to meet with to build that relationship. Again, because of how politics plays, a lot of times we end up in the defensive or we're behind the process. So the more you can do ahead of time to be proactive, to meet your legislator, to get to know them, and the issues that are important to them and build that relationship, I think that plays out in the long run, certainly.
But I think being proactive, not only with your legislators, I think with the whole advocacy process, right? Like even now, and I know you and I have had a lot of conversations that I won't talk about here because it's just part of what we're still working on. But you have to keep working even during these quiet times when they're doing this environmental assessment. Like if we wait until that 30-day, we have that 30-day counter starts ticking, I mean, really, we're going to be chasing our tails. Like, so we're assuming the worst and preparing for that. And then, but yeah, I think proactive in every way is important. And then I want to ask a couple things. So one, based on what you said, I know that hearing from your own personal delegates was important. How important is it to you when people from out of state were messaging you or emailing you saying, hey, if these horses go, we're not going to come to your state for tourism? So how impactful is that for people that don't live in the state?
Yeah, I think there's some impact. I am not inclined much to spend much time or reading a lot of information from other folks. But again, those folks that were reaching out, a lot of them had that family story. It was the story of their experience and time that was special to them with their family. And so I started to read, I think, those more. But I would encourage you that if you are not a direct a constituent of a legislator or somebody you're reaching out to, really try to be concise, really try to be focused on what you're trying to say. So whether, again, that's that message or the specific story you want to tell, don't send us an essay. And that's hard because a lot of you are passionate, and I use too many words when I write already. But I also have to think of, what do I want them to know if they're only going to read the first 3 sentences of this, or what's going to keep them going to read
Right.
the next paragraph too. But it's just, we're busy. Some creative things I think you could think about is it sending a video message versus typing it out? Is it including the pictures of your time with the horses or your family, and them seeing that? But I will say, I mean, again, because it was such a key part of our advocacy, that at least in our conversation in North Dakota, the tourism part played out. And the fact that, again, I didn't have a relationship with the horses. I was in the park last when I was a young child. I don't remember seeing the horses. I would think I would remember that if I had. But it was a light bulb to me hearing all these people who said, the only reason I come to North Dakota, or I come to North Dakota to see the horses. It may not be the only reason, but people from all over the region and specifically around the country. So it helps. But I would make sure, if you're doing an organized advocacy, that you start with local people first and then unleash everyone else, and I think part of that is asking the other people just to be patient. We want to make sure we're doing this well, and that they know that this isn't, because the other flip side of that is, if I first hear from a national organization and then I start hearing from people from California or Texas or Nebraska, and then the last person I hear from is someone who lives in my community or from my
Right.
state, now it feels orchestrated the wrong way or the other
Right.
way,
Right.
so.
Okay. And then, I hope that, I know that you'll be nice about this, but persistence, I think, is a whole nother thing. Because I'm sure, I know I talked to you several times, and I think that you knew I wasn't going away, right? Like, we
Oh,
needed
yeah.
help, and I wasn't going anywhere. So I think that, I don't know if you want to talk about that. I mean, you knew that you were going to hear from me again, so
Yeah,
we needed to do something, and not in a mean or threatening way, just in the
right.
passionate and
Yeah.
caring way.
Yeah, well, and passionate caring, but also I think appropriate. Your communication was always, I mean, it was professional, it was polite, it was, we were working towards things together. And I always feel bad about the number of times you have to sit and wait a week to hear back from me because of, a variety of things. So it's, yeah, that persistence pays off, because the other thing is, if I hadn't taken this under my wing, if I hadn't, reached out and said, I'm willing to dedicate a certain capacity of space that I have to help with this, then hopefully through that persistence, I would have been able to help connect you with someone else and just handed you off, right?
Right.
And I know that a number of the senators from that were already on board, I knew that they were new, so I wanted to help them be successful in
Right.
advocating for, they had, a lot of them had raised their hands saying, yeah, let's do it, but they also didn't know really how to do that. And so, I, we talk about the resolution. I was willing to do the behind the scenes stuff so that they could lead up front, right? So my name wasn't even ended up being on the resolution, but that wasn't as important to me as making sure that we made progress.
Right.
And because I knew that I'd get my recognition in time in the spotlight later or differently. But it was, for me, it was more important the right people were supporting it so that we could get it across the finish line.
Okay. And then I think something else that people don't realize either is that, um, we always just think that our state legislators, like, everything. And really all you're knowing is what we're telling you. And I quoted, when I did my presentation in Washington, DC, one of the senators had said to me, Senator Elkin actually told me, I'll carry these buckets for you. And I said, you need me to film? He said, absolutely. And I don't think that people understand that either, that even just like the other advocate challenging one of the members of Congress, it's not in a way to shame him. It's a way to really help educate. We're not sure where you're getting your information from, but here's a side that you're not hearing, and how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as I shared before, and Senator Elkin doesn't have staff. I don't have staff. I don't have, I don't have somebody who I can pig in to be the expert on natural resources or tourism or on the horses. I have to become that. And that's where when I talk about dedicating a little bit of space of what I can give. But I had Chris and I had others who were able to, if I needed something to, I mean, in all honesty, I mean, well, this will be public since it's going to be shared on YouTube. The letter that had my name on it, I didn't write. Chris
Right.
worked on that, and so was able to do that and hand it off. And then it was, my title and name that was able to be used, to carry it across the finish line.
Yeah, we drafted an initial resolution that I sent to Senator Elkin, and then they worked it out with Senator Beckendahl when he came in to include the horses. But yeah, the same thing. He was like, give me some points, let me know what to do, because again, you guys were getting ready to start a session. And I know that you said no before, but I do feel like, because you only have so much time, and we only not only had till January 26th for this, for what was important to us, but you guys had till January 26th for what I think it was just under 1,000 different bills that were going into this legislative session. So everyone had their own agenda, like things that they were already going to be working on going in. So
Yep.
whatever help you can give, I think is, I don't think that people realize that either, that it's not, our politicians are not all knowing. Um, Hopefully we find people like you and the senators and representatives that we have here that were open to hearing what we were saying and different concerns that we had and different talking points to put into the resolution. But that, like, educating our politicians is equally as important as educating the public, I think.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And I don't think any of us in North Dakota did this because we were looking for the political win of it. But what I'm about to say is something to also consider as part of your messaging is, does your organization or your advocacy bring voters to the table for some legislators, right? Is it someone who's in a divided district who, wins by a couple hundred votes that, this could be an issue that brings out new voters to them, or something that they can champion and get those independent voters to say, what, these people, this legislator, regardless of what political party they're on, they care about issues that are important to me or to my community, not just the national headlines or the big fights that we hear about often. So I think that's something to think about again. And that's part of when you build that coalition or that table, we call it, of who's there, who's not. Um, that's something you can bring to the table too, not only your expertise, but the people that are standing behind you that are willing to next November, fill in your circle the next time you're up for reelection.
But I think that that's something too that we need to remember even at a federal level when we're taking this that way. And I know I learned that from all the over 200 congressional offices that I staffed in. Most, and again, outside of our state, most of them haven't heard about our park, don't know that there are horses here, and weren't aware of what was happening. But even just educating our members of Congress, I think, is equally as important as our state legislators. I think that we just, as constituents, just think you know it all, because that's why you're there. But
Right.
really, you're depending on us for a lot of the information to help fill in blanks or gaps or the truth in some cases.
Yeah. Well, and from your experience of advocacy at the federal level, Senator Hoeven was on board almost immediately. Senator Kramer was on board almost immediately, but Senator or Congressman Armstrong wasn't necessarily on board right away. And
Right.
when you would go to these other members of Congress, a lot of them do what a lot of us would do as well. What does your member of Congress say?
Right.
For a
Right.
congressperson from Maryland isn't going to want to pick a fight with something that's in North Dakota's back door
Right.
or backyard. And so, again, that's where the power of the resolution came, is when you met with Senator or Representative Armstrong's staff is saying, hey, all of North Dakota's behind this.
Right.
Theoretically, you might be the last guy standing between, the only guy not supporting it. And so,
Right.
shortly thereafter, he came out publicly. And so then that now helps you go back to those other 199 Congress members and say, hey, actually, Representative Armstrong is on board, and we'd like you to join him in that support.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Josh? I really appreciate this. Like I said, I know there's a few people that wanted to be on the call that couldn't make it, but hopefully we got enough information out. I think that this was great. And I always appreciate talking to you and visiting with you. So, and really, really appreciate all your support. Because you were very instrumental, like you said, behind the scenes. your name wasn't on anything, but you really did do a lot to help not only get the resolution passed, but help educate me on how this process worked. And even when it got to the point where a different version passed in the House, and I was like, okay, now what's happening? And you said, well, now there's going to be a committee, and then they're going to talk, they'll decide on it. And so you were able to help me through that, and even up to and including getting me some signed copies of the resolution to take with to Washington, D.C. So I truly do appreciate all of your help. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate the advocacy that you do, Chris, and all the other folks. This is an issue that's important to so many folks. And, again, it's not one that might keep a lot of North Dakotans awake at night, but it's something that a lot of North Dakotans know more about now because
Right,
of the work you've done. And like I said, getting the media to tell the story and seeing the strong, overwhelming support. I can guarantee you, myself included, there are people now going to the park to see these horses because they're just curious about what is this all about, and to
right,
see that beauty of them and their I mean, it's a beautiful landscape already, but then you see these horses that, you know, certainly there's debate of where they began and who they may belong to or not, but everyone can have their own story as part of that too. So,
right.
yeah,
Well, thank you again. I appreciate you doing this with us again, and I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
sounds good. You all have a great time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.